I donated a kidney to my sister and I nearly died on the operating table. My parents were in the hospital that night. I thought they would be terrified of losing me their younger daughter, the one strapped to machines fighting for every breath. But when I opened my eyes after hours of darkness, I saw them holding her, not me, her. Victoria, the golden child, the one who had taken my kidney and my place in their arms. My chest was raw, my throat burned from the tube, and every inch of my body screamed. But nothing hurt as much as watching my parents press their faces against hers while I lay forgotten, shaking tubes dripping into my veins. That wasn't the first time I had been erased, but it was the clearest. I had flatlined. I heard the surgeons calling out numbers, felt the paddles slam against my skin, electricity yanking me back into life. I remember choking on the taste of blood in my mouth, and then silence. When I woke, I thought I would see my mother at my side. Instead, she was stroking Victoria's hair, whispering, "You're so brave, sweetheart." Brave. She had been asleep, her body receiving the organ I had ripped from mine. I was the one cut open. I was the one who almost never came back. And yet somehow she was the fragile hero. I lay there, heart pounding unevenly, every breath jagged, and listened to my father say, "We're just so grateful she made it through." His eyes never even flicked toward me. He didn't ask how many times the monitors had screamed that my heart had stopped. He didn't ask if I was in pain. He didn't ask if I wanted to die when I felt my body breaking apart on that table. He only cared that Victoria was alive. In that moment, something inside me cracked. I had done the unthinkable, given away part of myself so she could live, and my reward was to be invisible. My mother's nails traced circles on Victoria's wrist. My father kissed her forehead. And me. A nurse adjusted my IV and muttered, "You did good, honey." That was all the recognition I got. One stranger's pity while my own parents pretended I was nothing more than an empty vessel. I should have known. My whole life had been training for this. Victoria was always the chosen one, the better, softer, more deserving child. I was the strong one, the one they could push, demand, dismiss. When Christmas came, she opened boxes piled high with gifts while I scrubbed dishes in the kitchen. When she failed classes, they hired tutors. When I aced exams, they said, "Don't brag." When she cried, the world stopped. When I bled, they told me not to make a scene. And now, even as I lay bleeding from a wound stitched across my abdomen, they told me with their silence that nothing had changed. Tears slid from my eyes, soaking into the pillow. I couldn't speak, my throat too raw. Even if I had screamed, I don't think they would have listened. They never had. The beeping machines were louder than my existence. My sister turned her head once, just long enough to smirk. A smirk, as if she knew she had won. That was the night I realized I had given away more than my kidney. I had given away my last chance to believe my parents might choose me. And while my body fought to stay alive, they proved what I had always feared in their story. I was nothing but a shadow, good only for what I could sacrifice. But shadows see everything. And I promised myself as the morphine pulled me back under that if I survived, I would stop being their silent victim. They wanted fragile, I would show them how dangerous survival could be. I grew up in a house where love had rules, and those rules never worked in my favor. My sister Victoria was born first, and from the moment she could walk, everything seemed to bend toward her. She was the fragile one, the delicate flower, the child my parents swore needed protection. That made me by default the strong one, the one who could be ignored, the one expected to survive without comfort. Christmas mornings told the whole story. Victoria would sit cross-legged in front of the tree ribbons falling into her lap as she tore open box after box. Dolls, dresses, jewelry, whatever she asked for. I hovered in the doorway with a dish towel over my shoulder because while she unwrapped gifts, I was told to keep the kitchen clean. If I complained, my mother's voice cut sharp. "Don't be dramatic, Laura. Your sister deserves this. She's been through so much." Through what? She had a sniffle every winter, a fainting spell once at school, and suddenly she was porcelain. I was stone. At school, the same script played out. I worked for my grades, every A carved from late nights and tears. Victoria barely scraped by, but when she stumbled, my parents rushed tutors to her side. When I came home with honor roll certificates, my father's response was always the same. "Good. That's expected." When she managed a C, she was showered with praise. I stopped showing them my report cards. Even birthdays carried their hierarchy. At Victoria's parties, the whole neighborhood came. Balloons filled the living room cake tower stacked high. When it was my turn, the celebrations shrank to the kitchen table, a single candle, a half smile from my mother as she reminded me not to blow too hard. I learned early that my joy was inconvenient. The worst part wasn't the favoritism. It was the way they rewrote reality right in front of me. If Victoria snapped at me, they called it stress. If I snapped back, I was cruel. If she lied, it was a misunderstanding. If I told the truth, I was stirring trouble. The gaslighting was constant, subtle enough to make me question my own memory. By the time I was a teenager, I had learned to swallow my voice because nothing I said would ever be believed. One memory never left me. I was 15, standing in the doorway of the hospital room after Victoria fainted in gym class. She was fine, already sipping apple juice. My parents turned to me and said, "Be grateful you're strong, Laura. She isn't like you." The words settled deep into my skin, branding me as something less valuable, only because I could carry weight without breaking. That was the role they carved for me. The silent supporter, the shadow. And shadows don't get hugged. Shadows don't get chosen. So when I agreed years later to give Victoria my kidney, it wasn't really a choice at all. It was the final chapter in a story that had started long before. A story where my pain didn't count and her fragility always outweighed my existence. Lying in that hospital bed after surgery, abandoned while they clung to her, wasn't new. It was simply the cruelest confirmation of what I had always known. In our family, love was rationed, and I had never been allowed a share. When Victoria's kidneys started failing, the doctors laid out the options: dialysis for the rest of her life or a transplant. My parents didn't even blink. They looked straight at me. "Laura, you're the healthy one. You'll do this for your sister." It wasn't a question. It was an order wrapped in guilt. I sat there in that sterile office, the hum of the fluorescent lights pressing against my ears, and felt my chest close in. I was 28 years old, married, working long shifts just to keep my own bills paid, and suddenly, my body was on the auction block. I tried to hesitate. I asked about risks. The doctor's voice was calm, but honest: complications, infections, the possibility of my body never recovering fully. I remember looking at my mother, hoping for once she might protect me. Instead, she said, "Don't be selfish, Laura. She won't survive without you." My father nodded, adding, "You're stronger. You'll bounce back. Victoria won't." It was the same script I had lived under my whole life. Her fragility excused everything my strength condemned me to silence. I went home that night and lay awake next to my husband, Mark. He told me it was my decision, but there was something hollow in his voice, as though he already knew how this would end. "If you don't do it, your parents will never forgive you," he said quietly. And that was the truth. Forgiveness had never been free in my family. It had always been transactional. So I signed the papers. I told myself I was doing it out of love, not duty. I convinced myself that maybe if I gave Victoria part of me, I could finally earn my parents' respect. Maybe they would see I was worth more than the shadow they had cast me as. The weeks leading up to surgery were brutal. Blood tests, scans, endless needles in my arm. Each time, Victoria cried about how scared she was. My mother clutched her hand and whispered reassurances. No one looked at me as the nurse drew vial after vial from my veins. I was already disappearing in plain sight, the giver nobody wanted to acknowledge. The night before the operation, I sat in my car outside the hospital and cried until my chest hurt. Not because I didn't want to save her, but because deep down I knew this wasn't just about her survival. It was about cementing my place in a family that had never wanted me. I thought maybe this was the grand gesture that would finally make them see me, really see me. But I also knew the truth: they would never see me as fragile, as precious, as chosen. I was just the body they could cut open, the one they could drain, the one they could use. And still, I walked into that hospital, signed my name on the consent forms, and handed over my future like it was already theirs. I told myself this was sacrifice, but looking back, it was surrender. The morning of the surgery felt like stepping into a storm I couldn't escape. The hospital corridors stretched endlessly, the smell of disinfectant burning in my nose, the echo of wheels and hurried voices bouncing off white walls. I was stripped of everything: clothes, jewelry, dignity reduced to a thin gown that barely covered my shaking body. A nurse tried to smile, telling me it would be fine, but the way her eyes darted to the monitors betrayed her. Nothing about this was fine. They wheeled me into the operating room, and the cold air hit me like a slap. The table was metal and unforgiving beneath my back. Bright lights blinded me, forcing me to stare at nothing but whiteness. I heard the beeping of machines calibrating my heartbeat, the shuffle of gloves, snapping the clang of instruments being laid out like weapons. My body trembled uncontrollably, but it wasn't the cold, it was fear. As the anesthesiologist pressed the mask over my face, he whispered, "Count backward from 10. I barely made it to 8 before the world dissolved. But I didn't stay gone. Somewhere in the void, I felt my body thrash against the line between life and death. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, but I could hear. The monitor alarms screeched, jagged, panicked. A voice shouted, "She's crashing." Heart rate dropping fast. "Get the paddles." Then a surge of pain ripped through my chest as the defibrillator jolted me, tearing me out of the abyss for a heartbeat before I slipped back under. Another shock came harder this time, my ribs aching even in unconsciousness. I remember a distant, desperate voice. "Stay with us, Laura. Stay with us." The next time I surfaced, my throat burned like fire raw from the tube shoved down it. I could taste metal blood at the back of my tongue. My chest rose unevenly, dragged up and down by machines. Every nerve in my body screamed, stitched and sliced, hollowed out by the absence of something vital. I had given away a part of myself and almost lost everything else with it. And through it all, no one came. Not my mother, not my father, not Mark. I learned later that while I fought for my life on that table, my family sat in the waiting room praying only for Victoria. My mother held her hand, whispering comfort before her anesthesia. My father kissed her forehead like she was heading to war. No one asked about me. No one cared that the donor could die as easily as the recipient. When the haze finally lifted enough for me to open my eyes, the room swam in sterile blue and silver. My chest ached, my abdomen throbbed with each breath, the pain so sharp I thought it might split me apart all over again. I turned my head desperate for someone, anyone who might care that I was alive. And then I saw it. Across the recovery room, my parents were wrapped around Victoria. My mother was crying, not for me, but for her. My father's voice cracked as he whispered, "Our fragile girl made it through." Fragile. That cursed word again like a knife twisting into my gut. She lay there pale but serene, basking in the glow of their adoration, while I lay bloodied, gutted, barely breathing. No one held my hand. No one brushed back my sweat-soaked hair. No one kissed my forehead. I had nearly died, and yet in that moment I was invisible. The nurse adjusted my IV, her voice soft as she leaned close. "You were brave," she said. "One stranger's kindness." That was all I got. My parents never even turned their heads. That was the moment I knew the truth. I had given them everything, and it would never be enough. The days after the surgery blurred together in waves of pain and exhaustion. My body felt hollow, my abdomen stitched into a cage that refused to let me breathe without stabbing me from the inside. I thought the worst was over, that the near death on the table had been the climax, and now life would slowly stitch itself back together. I was wrong. At first, I noticed little things about Mark. My husband used to hover when I was sick, bringing me tea, fluffing pillows, fussing until I laughed. Now he barely lingered in my room. He stayed longer in Victoria's. He told me he was checking on her, that she needed more support. "She just went through a transplant too," he said one evening when I asked why he hadn't been by my side. The words stung, too, as if what I had endured, the scalpel, the crash cart, the shocks that tore through my body, was somehow equal to her lying unconscious while my kidney saved her life. I brushed it off at first. I told myself I was imagining things a byproduct of pain meds and exhaustion. But then I saw it. One night, unable to sleep, I dragged myself down the hall for water. I stopped when I heard low voices. Mark and Victoria. They were laughing. I pressed against the wall, every nerve in me burning. Through the crack in the door, I saw his hand on hers. Not in a casual way, not in a brother-in-law way. In a way that said, intimacy, possession, danger. My chest tightened the sutures in my side, screaming as I staggered back to my room. I told myself it was nothing, Just stress, just my mind playing tricks. But the look on his face when he finally came in, the guilty flicker in his eyes when I asked where he had been, it told me everything. The next day, I tried to talk to my parents. I told my mother that I felt abandoned, that Mark was spending more time with Victoria than with me. She pursed her lips and said, "Laura, don't start. He's being kind. Victoria needs comfort right now." My father chimed in, "Stop twisting things. You always make yourself the victim. Be grateful she's alive." Their words hit harder than the surgeon's scalpel. I wasn't twisting anything. I was bleeding out in plain sight, but no one cared to notice. The pattern grew sharper each day. Mark brought flowers, but not to my room, to hers. He skipped meals with me, but I saw him carrying trays of food to her bed. When visitors came, he hovered near her side, laughing at her jokes, nodding as though she were his son. And when I asked him directly, he snapped, "Don't be paranoid, Laura. You're exhausted. Stop imagining things." Paranoid, dramatic, overreacting. The words my family had always used to silence me now slid from my husband's mouth. It was like the infection spreading from my wound had seeped into my marriage too. One evening, as I lay curled in pain, I heard Victoria's laugh echo down the hall, bright and sharp. Mark's voice followed low and warm, and in that moment I knew the kidney wasn't the only thing she had taken from me. She was taking him too. Recovery dragged on each day, a battlefield between pain and exhaustion, but the real wounds weren't in my body anymore. They were in the way people looked at me, or didn't. My parents treated Victoria's survival like a miracle. They threw a small gathering a few weeks after the surgery, insisting it was to celebrate a second chance at life. I knew whose life they meant, and it wasn't mine. I showed up pale, still weak, my steps slow and unsteady. My abdomen ached under the dress. I forced myself into each seam, pressing against the raw line of my scar. I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would notice the effort it had taken for me to even stand there. Instead, when I walked into the living room, every eye turned to Victoria, glowing in a silk blouse, her skin flushed with health. She looked like the survivor, like the heroine. I looked like the shadow that had made it possible. Halfway through the evening, Victoria raised her glass. "I want to thank my family," she said, her voice trembling with fake humility. "I wouldn't be here without all of you." She paused, her eyes sliding over me, a smile twitching at the corner of her mouth. "And of course, my sister Laura. She's always been strong. Maybe too strong sometimes. But I guess that's what it takes to be a donor." Laughter rippled across the room. My cheeks burned. Too strong. She had turned my sacrifice into a joke. Mark chuckled with the rest of them, his hand resting on her chair as if it belonged there. My mother dabbed her eyes, whispering about how selfless Victoria was. My father clapped her on the back, proud and loud. Not one of them looked at me sitting on the edge of the couch with pain radiating through my body, shame curling in my stomach like acid. I tried to stand to remind them that I was still here, but my knees buckled. The room blurred, my breath catching against the stab of stitches tearing under my ribs. I stumbled, one hand clutching my side, the other grabbing at the table. Plates clattered, glasses toppled, and for one humiliating moment I was sprawled across the floor, gasping like a broken thing. Silence hung for a heartbeat. Then Victoria laughed. "Careful, Laura. You'll make it all about you again." The room erupted with nervous chuckles, the kind people make when they know cruelty is happening, but are too spineless to stop it. My face burned hotter than the fever I felt creeping through my skin. I wanted to scream that I had almost died for her, that every laugh was a knife twisting deeper into the wound I still carried. But the words stuck in my throat. Mark helped me up his grip, rough his whisper sharp in my ear. "Don't embarrass us. Sit down. Embarrass us." As if my body's collapse was a performance I had chosen. As if my pain wasn't real. I sank back into the couch, the room spinning, the laughter echoing like thunder in my skull. That night alone in my room, I pressed my hand against my scar and felt something darker than grief settle inside me. They wanted me silent, small, humiliated. They wanted me erased. But humiliation has a way of curdling into rage, and rage is harder to ignore than pain. It was a Sunday afternoon when the final blade slipped between my ribs. I was still weak, still dragging myself through days stitched with pain when my parents called me over for what they described as family news. I sat in their living room, the same living room where I had been humiliated weeks before, and braced myself. I thought maybe it would be about Victoria's recovery, maybe about her going back to work. I was not prepared for what she said. Victoria stood her hand resting lightly on her stomach, her lips curling in a smile that was both triumphant and cruel. "I'm pregnant," she announced. The room erupted in gasps and cheers. My mother clapped her hands to her mouth, crying, "Oh my God, Victoria, that's wonderful!" My father pulled her into his arms, his booming laugh filling the room. I sat frozen, the words ringing in my ears like a death knell. Pregnant. Then my eyes shifted to Mark, my husband. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't even pretending. He was standing next to her, his hand brushing against her back like it belonged there. My stomach churned my stitches, screaming as the realization carved itself into me. The child wasn't some stranger's. It was his. My husband had given her more than comfort. I staggered to my feet, the world tilting. "No," I whispered, my voice raw. "Tell me this isn't real." Victoria's smile widened, almost pitying. "Laura, don't act surprised. You've always known Mark needed more than you could give." The room buzzed with whispers, but not outrage, not sympathy. Just the sound of my world collapsing. I turned to my parents, desperate for someone to defend me. "Do you hear her? Do you see what they've done?" My mother's face hardened. "Laura, don't make this ugly. She's carrying a child. That's a blessing." My father added, "Stop being dramatic. You've always been jealous of her. Maybe if you had been a better wife." His words trailed off heavy with accusation, each syllable striking like a hammer. I felt the floor sway beneath me, but it wasn't weakness this time. It was rage. "I nearly died for her," I shouted, my voice breaking. "I gave her my kidney, and this is what she does." But my words didn't matter. My mother wrapped her arms around Victoria, kissing her forehead as though she were some saint. Mark stood silent, his eyes cold, no shame in them, only defiance. The final blow came when my father pointed at the door. "Maybe you should leave Laura. You're poisoning this family with your bitterness. Victoria deserves peace." My chest tightened until I couldn't breathe. My parents had chosen her again, but this time it wasn't just about favoritism. It was about erasing me completely. I stumbled out into the night air, the cold wind cutting through my thin coat, the stitches in my side tearing with each step. My vision blurred with tears, but I didn't stop walking. I walked until the house disappeared behind me, until the sound of their laughter was just a ghost in the dark. Standing alone under a flickering streetlight, I pressed my hand to my scar and swore I would never forgive them. Not Victoria, not Mark, not my parents who had turned betrayal into a blessing. They thought I was weak because I was wounded, but they had forgotten one thing. I had already died once and come back, and that meant I wasn't afraid of tearing everything they loved to the ground. The night I left my parents' house, I had nothing but a half-packed bag and a body that still ached from surgery. My scar pulled with every step, each breath a reminder of what I had given and what had been stolen. The streets were quiet, but inside me everything roared. Rage, grief, betrayal, they all tangled together until I felt hollow and heavy at the same time. I found a small apartment on the edge of town, the kind of place where walls are thin and the neighbors don't ask questions. The first night I lay on the mattress staring at the cracked ceiling, silence pressing against me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't surrounded by my family's voices. No gaslighting, no commands, no cold laughter, just silence. But instead of peace, it felt like drowning. The days blurred into each other. My body struggled to heal the scar, angry and red fever licking at my skin. I rationed cheap food, swallowing pain pills with lukewarm water. Some nights I woke up choking on sobs, clutching my abdomen as though I could hold myself together with my bare hands. I wondered if I should have just died on that operating table. At least then the betrayal would have ended with me. But even in the thickest fog of pain, a thought kept burning. They wanted me gone. They wanted me erased, and that thought kept me alive. I began writing everything down, every cruel word my parents had spoken, every look between Mark and Victoria. Every time I had been silenced, dismissed, erased, I kept the notebook beside my bed, filling page after page. It wasn't just memory anymore, it was evidence. The world outside my window didn't stop for me. I saw mothers walking children to school, couples laughing on their way to dinner, friends clinking glasses in the bar across the street. Each scene was a knife reminding me of what I had lost, but it also reminded me of what they thought I would never have again. And that made me want to fight. I pressed my palm against my scar one night, feeling the jagged line beneath the skin. They thought it was proof of my weakness, but I decided it would become my armor. I whispered into the empty room, "You took everything from me. Now I'll take it back." It was the first time since the surgery that my voice didn't shake. The first time I walked into Denise Carter's office, I was still bent slightly from the pain in my side, one hand hovering over the scar as if to shield it from the world. Denise looked up from a stack of papers, her sharp eyes narrowing in a way that told me she had seen women like me before. Women chewed up by their families and spit out like they didn't matter. "Tell me everything," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. So I did. I told her about the surgery, the near death on the table, my parents hugging Victoria while I bled out the way Mark lingered in Victoria's room instead of mine, the cruel laughter at the party, the announcement of her pregnancy, and finally the moment my father told me to leave. By the end, my throat was raw and my hands trembled so badly that I could barely hold the cup of water she had given me. Denise leaned back, her fingers steepled. "Laura, what you've just described isn't just betrayal, it's exploitation. And if your parents set up a trust for their children, there might be conditions. Have you ever heard of a morality clause?" The phrase caught in my mind like a spark. Morality clause. She nodded. Some trusts include provisions. If the heirs commit acts that are fraudulent, abusive, or in bad faith, they can lose their rights to the inheritance. If what you're telling me is true, infidelity, financial misuse, manipulation, we can use that. But we'll need proof. Solid, undeniable proof. Proof, that was the word that started everything. I spent the next weeks piecing my shattered life into a weapon. Denise guided me each step like constructing a case brick by brick. First, the finances. Victoria had always lived beyond her means, but I had never questioned how. Denise suggested we start there. I went through old emails, bank alerts, receipts that I had shoved into drawers without thinking. With her help, I traced a pattern transfers from my parents' trust accounts directly into Victoria's personal ones. Thousands of dollars, sometimes labeled as medical support, other times hidden under vague notations. Denise's paralegal pulled records through legal channels, uncovering a web of withdrawals that had no approval signatures. It was theft, plain and simple. Next, the affair. It wasn't enough to say I had seen them together. I needed proof that the pregnancy was Mark's and that the relationship had started before my marriage collapsed. I went through Mark's phone one night. When he left it at the apartment, he still came by occasionally, pretending to check on me out of obligation. My hands shook as I unlocked it, scrolling through messages that left no doubt. "I can't wait to hold you again. She doesn't know anything. This baby will be our fresh start." The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears, but I took screenshots of every single one, saving them to a hidden drive Denise had given me. Then came the recordings. Denise reminded me that in our state, as long as one party to a conversation consents, it's legal to record. So I started carrying my phone in my pocket whenever I visited my parents, whenever Mark stopped by, whenever Victoria's sharp tongue aimed at me. Slowly, I built a library of cruelty. My mother's voice saying Laura was always jealous. Maybe it would have been easier if she hadn't survived the surgery. My father muttering, "She's trying to ruin Victoria's happiness again." Mark snapping, "Don't embarrass us. Sit down." And the worst, Victoria herself laughing into the phone. "She nearly died and still thinks she matters. Pathetic." Each clip was like reliving the wound, but Denise's steady nod every time I handed her another file gave me strength. Evidence never blinks, she reminded me. They can deny your feelings, they can twist your words, but they can't erase their own voices, their own texts, their own signatures. Piece by piece, the folder grew. Financial records, screenshots, audio files, even photos like the one I snapped at the party, Mark's hand lingering too long on Victoria's waist while she smirked at me across the room. The day Denise spread everything across her desk, it no longer looked like fragments of my pain. It looked like a case strong enough to topple the golden child, the husband who betrayed me, and the parents who had chosen them over me. "What do you want, Laura?" Denise asked, her tone calm but fierce. "Do you want them cut out of the inheritance? Do you want custody of assets? Or do you want something more public?" I stared at the pile of evidence, my pulse thundering. I thought of the baby shower invitation I had tucked into my bag, the celebration of Victoria's pregnancy scheduled for the following month. My parents had already called it the event of the year. Neighbors, friends, extended family all would be there. "I want the truth to be seen," I whispered. "Not just in court, by everyone who ever believed their lies." Denise's lips curved into a rare smile. "Then we'll make sure the evidence speaks where they can't silence you. But remember, once this comes out, there's no going back." I pressed my hand against my scar, feeling the jagged line beneath my skin. "Good," I said. "I don't want to go back." From that moment, the plan was set. The baby shower wouldn't just be a celebration. It would be the stage where every hidden truth, every cruel word, every betrayal was dragged into the light. The day of the baby shower dawned bright and sickeningly cheerful, as if the universe wanted to mock me. Balloons bobbed on the porch of my parents' house, pastel ribbons fluttering in the breeze. Cars lined the driveway and spilled into the street. Neighbors carried brightly wrapped gifts and trays of food through the front door, laughter spilling out behind them. To everyone else, it was a celebration of new life. To me, it was the perfect battlefield. I stood across the street for a moment, clutching the folder tucked into my bag. Inside were weeks of pain transformed into proof, texts, recordings, bank statements, photographs. Evidence that would cut sharper than any scalpel. Denise had helped me organize it, and her associate was already inside, disguised as a guest, ready to help me when the time came. My hands trembled not from fear, but from anticipation. For once, the fragility they mocked me for was about to become their undoing. When I walked into the house, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd, Laura, the forgotten sister, the one who nearly died. I ignored them and forced my body to move forward, pain pulling at the scar hidden beneath my dress. Victoria stood in the center of it all, glowing in a pale pink gown, her hand resting on the swell of her stomach. Mark hovered beside her, his arm draped casually over her chair like a husband proud of his wife. My parents flanked them, pride radiating from their faces. It was a tableau of betrayal. My mother spotted me first. Her smile faltered. "Laura," she said tightly, "I didn't think you'd come." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. The party went on as if I hadn't spoken, but the air shifted. Guests offered congratulations, snapped photos, clinked glasses. Victoria basked in it, her eyes glittering with triumph every time they flicked towards me. Mark avoided my gaze altogether, but his hand never left her back. My father raised a toast, his voice booming. "To Victoria, to Mark, and to the future of this family. May this child bring us joy and healing." Healing, the word curdled in my stomach. When the applause died, I stepped forward. My hands no longer shook. My voice rang clear, slicing through the noise. "Funny, Dad, you talk about healing, but maybe everyone should see what kind of rot this family is really built on." A hush fell. My parents stiffened, their smiles frozen. Victoria's face flickered with unease, then smoothed into a smirk. "Laura, don't cause a scene," my mother hissed. But it was too late. I pulled the small projector from my bag and set it on the table. The associate Denise had sent gave me a subtle nod and connected the files. The screen flickered to life against the living room wall, and the first message appeared in bold white letters. "I can't wait to hold you again." Mark's name glowed at the top of the screen. Gasps filled the room. I advanced the slide. Another text. "She doesn't know anything. This baby will be our fresh start." Victoria's reply. "She's pathetic. Always has been." The whispers turned into a roar. Guests shifted, eyes darting between Victoria and Mark, their faces draining of color. "Stop this!" my father barked, striding toward me. But before he could reach me, the next file played. An audio recording filled the room, my mother's voice unmistakable, dripping with venom. Maybe it would have been easier if Laura hadn't survived the surgery. The crowd erupted. Someone muttered, "My God," Another whispered, "Did she really say that?" My mother lunged for the projector, but Denise's associate intercepted her calm and firm. "Let her finish." I pressed play on another recording. This time it was Victoria laughing. She nearly died and still thinks she matters. Pathetic. Victoria's face went pale, her smirk collapsing. She reached for Mark's hand, but he pulled away, sweat breaking across his forehead as the crowd's eyes pinned him in place. "Want more?" I asked, my voice cutting through the chaos. "Here are the bank transfers. Thousands of dollars siphoned from the family trust into Victoria's account. Fraud hidden under medical excuses." And here I flipped to another slide. A photo of Mark at Victoria's side, his hand on her waist, both of them caught mid-laugh, their intimacy undeniable. The room was boiling now. Neighbors whispering furiously, some openly glaring at my parents. My father's voice cracked, desperate. "Turn it off, Laura. This isn't the time." "This is exactly the time," I shot back. "You've hidden behind lies for years. You gaslighted me, erased me, made me believe my pain didn't matter. You told me to give my body for her, and when I nearly died, you hugged her instead. You called me dramatic, paranoid, bitter. But evidence never blinks, and tonight everyone gets to see the truth." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Denise stepped forward from the back of the room. She wasn't disguised. She held up a folder thick with papers. "I'm Denise Carter, attorney at law. These documents prove violations of the morality clause in the Bennett Family Trust. By committing infidelity, fraud, and abuse, Victoria and Mark have forfeited all rights to inheritance. Effective immediately, the assets will be frozen until redistribution is finalized." A collective gasp swept through the room. My parents staggered back as though struck. Victoria clutched her stomach, her face twisted with rage. "You can't do this," she screamed. "This is my child's future." Denise's tone was cool, lethal. "Your actions cost you that future. The law is clear." Mark finally spoke, his voice breaking. "Laura, please." I cut him off with a glare. "Don't you dare speak my name. You used me, betrayed me, and thought I'd stay silent. You were wrong." The crowd began to murmur louder this time, but the tone had changed. No sympathy for Victoria. No pride for my parents. Just disgust. My mother tried to stammer excuses, but no one listened. My father's booming voice had shriveled into silence. Victoria wept, but the only arms reaching for her now were her own. I stood straighter than I had in months, the pain in my body eclipsed by the fire in my chest. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. For the first time, their lies had burned to ash in front of witnesses. And as I shut off the projector and gathered my folder, I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. They wanted fragile. Instead, they got truth. And truth was far more dangerous than they ever imagined. The courtroom smelled of wood polish and old paper, a place where truth was carved into stone, whether people liked it or not. Denise stood beside me, crisp in her navy suit, her calm presence steadying the fire that still burned in my chest. Across the aisle sat Victoria and Mark, pale and jittery. My parents were behind them, stiff as statues, refusing to meet my eyes. The judge adjusted his glasses and tapped the stack of documents Denise had submitted. "We have here financial records showing unauthorized withdrawals from the Bennett Family Trust. We also have audio recordings that demonstrate a clear pattern of abuse and moral misconduct. And finally, proof of infidelity between Mr. Mark Bennett and his sister-in-law resulting in pregnancy." His gaze sharpened, cutting through their facade. "This court finds that such actions violate the morality clause outlined in the trust agreement." Victoria's sob tore through the silence. She gripped Mark's arm, but he sat frozen, his face drained of all color. My father leaned forward, desperate. "Your Honor, please, this is a family matter. We can handle it privately." The judge's voice boomed, leaving no room for argument. This ceased being a private matter when funds were stolen and conditions of the trust were broken. The law is not optional. Denise rose smoothly. "Your Honor, we request immediate forfeiture of Victoria Bennett's and Mark Bennett's rights to the trust, along with restitution for the sums already taken." The gavel struck once. "Granted. Effective immediately, Victoria and Mark Bennett are disinherited. The stolen funds must be repaid and all future claims to the estate are void." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. My mother clutched her chest as if the verdict had struck her physically. My father's jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might shatter. Victoria collapsed against Mark, sobbing, "This isn't fair. It was supposed to be mine." Mark tried to shush her, but his own voice cracked. "We'll have nothing." The judge's eyes flicked to me. "Ms. Bennett, you endured great hardship. You nearly lost your life in the process. This court commends your courage in bringing the truth forward." For the first time in my life, someone in authority had looked at me and seen me not as the strong one to be used, not as the shadow, but as a person whose pain mattered. My throat tightened, but I held my head high. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps. Neighbors extended relatives people who once whispered about how perfect Victoria was. They now looked at her with scorn. She stole her sister's husband. She lost the inheritance. She ruined everything. Their voices buzzed, but I walked through it with a strange calm. Beside me, Denise murmured, "Justice doesn't erase betrayal, Laura, but it puts it where it belongs in the light." Behind us, my parents tried to shield Victoria from the cameras, but it was useless. Her tears no longer inspired sympathy. Mark's silence no longer carried dignity. They had been exposed, and exposure was its own kind of sentence. They had wanted me invisible. Instead, they were the ones who would spend the rest of their lives being seen for what they truly were. The day after the court ruling, I woke up in my apartment and felt something I hadn't known in years, silence that didn't hurt. No voices telling me I was dramatic. No footsteps pacing the hall outside my room waiting to scold. No laughter from Victoria dripping with cruelty. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the faint song of birds outside my window, and my own steady breath. For the first time since the surgery, since before the betrayal, I didn't feel erased. I felt alive. I walked into the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror. The scar along my abdomen glared back at me, jagged and unforgiving. For months I had hated it, touched it with shame, felt it burning with the memory of near death. But that morning I pressed my fingers against it and saw something else. Survival. Proof that I had walked through fire and come out breathing. That scar wasn't weakness, it was armor. A week later, I booked an appointment at a tattoo studio downtown. The artist was a woman about my age, her arms covered in inked feathers and flames. I lay back on the chair as she traced the outline over my scar, a phoenix rising from ash wings stretching across the damaged skin. The needle burned, but I welcomed it. Pain that I chose was different. Pain that created beauty was power. When it was done, I looked down and saw my rebirth carved into me. Not their fragile girl, not their shadow, my own warrior. But I didn't stop there. I knew if I stayed silent again, I'd rot from the inside. So I began to share. I spoke at a support group for organ donors, telling them not just about the surgery, but about what came after the betrayal, the gaslighting, the erasure. Faces around the circle nodded, some with tears, because they knew what it was like to give and be taken for granted. Later, I partnered with Denise to start a nonprofit that provided resources for donors abandoned by their families. We called it Quiet Strength because that was what I had been forced to carry and what I was determined to transform into something louder, stronger, undeniable. Meanwhile, the fallout for Victoria and Mark was brutal. News of the court case spread through the community. They lost the trust money, their reputations shredded. Friends turned away. Mark lost his job when his employer discovered the scandal splashed across local papers. Victoria, once the golden child, couldn't walk into a grocery store without whispers chasing her down the aisles. My parents tried to defend her at first, but the recordings I had played at the baby shower echoed everywhere. No one wanted to believe in their version of the story anymore. They had been unmasked. Sometimes I'd see them from afar, Victoria hair, unkempt eyes hollow, pushing a cart with nothing but a few cheap items. Mark trailing behind her, his shoulders hunched, the proud arrogance drained from his face. They avoided me and I let them. They had stolen enough. I didn't need revenge in the form of confrontation anymore. Their lives had become their punishment. One evening, as I walked home from the community center where I had spoken to a new group of survivors, the sun dipped low, streaking the sky with orange and violet. I stopped on the sidewalk, the city buzzing around me, and felt the quiet bloom inside. They had nearly destroyed me. I had nearly died on that table, but here I was alive, strong, whole. I whispered into the twilight words, only for me, I gave her my kidney. I almost gave her my life. She tried to take everything else, but the truth gave me back my freedom. The wind caught my hair, lifting it like wings. And for the first time, I smiled, not the brittle smile I used to wear to keep the peace, but a real one, fierce and steady. Because I knew this was my life now, mine alone. No parents dictating my worth. No sister feeding off my strength. No husband stealing my trust. Just me, my scar, my phoenix, and the future I would build with my own hands. I wasn't their fragile girl. I wasn't their shadow. I was my own beginning.